Welcome to the webinar on what we got wrong about metabolic health and obesity. I am just gonna chat with you for just a minute and allow some people to hop on. I don't want too many people to miss too much of this information before we really get into the meat of it. But I am so excited that you're here. I'm so excited that this day is here. This has been a long time in the coming for me to actually have a business where it's my job to help educate people on how to take better care of themselves. It's my passion. I believe that when you know better, you do better. And by the end of this, I want you to definitely know better about metabolic health. So as you are catching this, if you would just give me in the comment section where you're tuning in from and why you're here. Like, what about this topic, what about metabolic health intrigued you enough to show up on a Wednesday night at close to dinner time? And I appreciate you being here. And before we get started too much, I just want to say a quick prayer that whatever you need out of this, that God gives me the right words in the right way that is able to reach you and help you to understand just how much better to take care of yourself with this information. So I really want to make an impact and help you to live a healthier life. So, amen. All right, so let's see. I'm going to wait just another couple of seconds. I'm looking, I'm just trying to see if anyone's on here, and I'm trying to see where, all right, well, I don't see where the comments are, but please, if you have questions or if you have comments while we're going along, I won't be able to answer them here live just because I want to stay on track. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but just know that I will read all the comments. If you have questions, I will get back to you. I'll either send you a voice message or I'll send you a direct message and be sure that I am answering your questions. Okay. So this is a passion of mine for kind of a poignant reason as we're coming up on Mother's Day. My family history is riddled with metabolic disease, and I lost my mom 3 years ago to metabolic disease. She probably lived with it for 20 years of her life. And, she did all the things. She went to her doctor's appointments, she took the medications, and it didn't make a bit of difference to the outcome. She died way too young. And so if I can share some information that keeps you from losing a loved one or keeps you from, experiencing disease earlier than what you have to or at all, then I certainly want to be able to do that. And, I get asked a lot of questions about this very topic, about metabolism, about, what certain things do in our body and how our body reacts to that. I get asked these questions personally and professionally. And the really interesting thing and the thing that I want you to hear is that I get asked these questions from medical professionals. I've been a nurse for 33 years. I was previously a nurse practitioner. I'm now currently a nurse anesthetist. And in that role, a lot of times I have to really talk to the doctor and say, this patient is not, they're sick, they're not healthy. And they kind of look at me like, what do you mean? So people understanding, even people in the medical field, a lot of times don't understand how big this issue is and really what it's doing to us as a community and what the best way is to actually get at it and treat it. So at the beginning of the year, I started down this path of functional medicine. I'm a certified functional medicine practitioner, and this is kind of my initial launch of my business. This is my first website, and I'm so excited about it. So thank you again for tuning in. But for those of you who haven't ever dealt with any functional medicine, you've never gone to a functional medicine practitioner, Let me just tell you a little bit about what that is and sort of how I'm coming at this information, which might be a little different than what you've experienced in the past. And so I believe that functional medicine is actually foundational medicine, that, in traditional medicine, a lot of what you experience is you're going to specialists who are looking at your symptom, which is kind of the bottom of the cascade of what's happened all up in that before, that has got you to that symptomology, and they're sort of breaking you apart into all these individual little pieces. And what functional medicine does is it recognizes that you are one individual, you're one whole organism, and whatever happens, all of those seemingly separate and different, unrelated symptoms are probably related. You just have to look back farther enough in the history, or in your labs, or whatever it is, so that we can find what's causing all of this whole cascade to occur, and for those symptoms for you to be experiencing those symptoms. So, and that's why I love it so much, because I really feel like I can make an impact in someone by looking deep, getting a lot of information, getting very specific and very personalized labs that look for not only those symptoms. I mean, those are easy to find. We can find those in traditional labs, but are also looking further enough back so that we can find what's causing all of these symptoms. I recently read a book that was called Outlive, and it was kind of interesting in that he talks about medicine as medicine 1.0, where we were using leeches to cure people, and we knew that what we were doing made a difference for someone, but we didn't know exactly how or why, and maybe what we were doing made an improvement, but not a direct improvement. And so that was kind of medicine 1.0. And medicine 2.0 is where we are now. And it's kind of been since the discovery of penicillin. Now we know that there are specific treatments where we can treat a symptoms, and we can make a symptom, hopefully, better with that treatment. But it really has changed the way that medicine has evolved. I think that functional medicine is not only foundational medicine, but it's original medicine, and it sort of looks at us as a whole individual. And with medicine 2.0, that's when we started dissecting you down into the different body parts, and we started looking at scientific discovery. And if we couldn't understand why something happened, then we kind of did away with that information. And so now, or what we're hoping to get to, and I think that functional medicine has a big role in, is something called medicine 3.0, and it's on the horizon. And the really exciting thing about this medicine 3.0 is that it's predictive. And so we can look at your traditional labs in a different way, or we can recommend different labs that look at the reason why you're having those symptoms, that look a little further back into your metabolism and tell us where the problem is, so that we can treat that root cause, we can treat that problem. Or we can predict, and we can say, hey, this is what's going on. And if we don't change something now with lifestyle or diet or exercise or stress reduction or get you more sleep, then what's coming down the path is going to be disease. It's going to be these symptoms and disease. So I love that. I love being able to look at it and really intervene at an area that's going to make a big difference. It's also very precise, and it's not one size fits all. So we're looking at, for you in particular, this is how your body's responding specifically to what you're doing. And this is how we intervene to make that better. And then finally, it's preventative. One of the things that we lack in traditional medicine, oh, Tara, I hope that you do not have a tornado, but that's been a little crazy. I'm finally seeing messages. So if you have a question, go ahead and post it, and hopefully I can get to some of those at the end. But it's preventative, and that's what we've needed all along, and that's what's really missing in traditional medicine. So that's why I'm so passionate about this. All right, so when we're talking about metabolic dysfunction, let's define some things here, and let me tell you what I'm talking about. So let's define metabolism. And that is where your body takes in food and it converts that food from food stuff into glucose, and it gets distributed out to the cells, and it enters the cell and it gets converted into energy, and there's a waste product, and that waste product gets taken away from the cell and eliminated from the body. So that's the whole process. That is metabolism. So when we have dysfunction, we either have a problem with converting that food into glucose, which is rarely an issue. We have trouble getting that glucose into the cell, or we have trouble converting that glucose into energy, or we have trouble getting rid of the byproducts of all of those processes out of the cell and out of the body. And so that's dysfunction. And one thing that you might have been told is that you have metabolic syndrome. Maybe you haven't been told that, but we're going to define that as well, because it is, really a worldwide epidemic. There's over 1 billion people in the world that have metabolic syndrome. And so let's talk about what that is. If you've been told you have metabolic syndrome and you're not sure why you even got that diagnosis, first of all, just remember that syndrome is kind of a group of symptoms or a group of conditions that you kind of see together a lot of times. And so back in the 1980s, it was defined as a syndrome, and it was defined as metabolic syndrome. So if you're not sure how you got diagnosed with that, don't feel bad, because up until as recent as 5 years ago, there were 6 major World Health Organizations that all had their own definition of what metabolic syndrome is. And so we've kind of gotten it clarified. And what it is 3 of these 5 conditions that I'm going to tell you about. And the first one is that you have high blood pressure, and that's defined as blood pressure of 130/85. And so it can be either if your blood pressure is consistently over 130, the top number, or the bottom number is consistently over 85, or both of those, then you're diagnosed as having high blood pressure. High triglycerides, and that is defined as triglycerides over 150. And just know that triglycerides and cholesterol are not the same thing. They are both on a lipid panel or on a cholesterol panel, you might have heard it, but they're not the same thing. That your HDL, or your good cholesterol, is actually low. And in women, it's less than 50, or in men, it is less than 40. Or that your fasting glucose, and this is not a random glucose. This is a fasting glucose where you've gone several hours, I think it's at least 6 hours, without eating anything, is 100, less than 100. And that's a little bit of a change, because it used to be 110, but what we found is that just isn't a tight enough control. And then the last thing is that you have a large waist. So you might have heard that people who have an apple shape are not as healthy as people who have a pear-shaped, and that is true. And the reason being is because we find that if you tend to accumulate fat around your middle, that means something different than if you accumulate fat around your hips and thighs. So that number that we're looking for you to be diagnosed as having a large waist is for women greater than 35 centimeters, and for men greater than 40 centimeters. So you don't have to have all of these. You just pick 3 of the 5, and if that is if that defines you, or if that's something that you're dealing with, then you have metabolic syndrome. And why do we care? First of all, I just told you that over 1 billion people worldwide have this. Secondly, is because 88% of the population of the United States is metabolically sick. 88%. Now, not everyone has a diagnosis of metabolic syndrome, but they do have metabolic dysfunction. And if we don't intervene higher up in that whole cascade, then you will go on to develop metabolic syndrome. And that increases your risk of cardiovascular disease, so heart attack, cardiac dysfunction, increases your risk of stroke, and it increases your risk of diabetes. And diabetes by itself increases your risk of those other 2 alone. So the 3 of those, that's really what we're trying to keep from from happening, is that you would develop those things. A third of the US population has actual metabolic syndrome. And so, you know, that is 1 in 3 people. So if there are, you know, let's say there's 10 of us on here, then 3 of those 10 are likely to have metabolic syndrome, and 8 of those 10 are likely to have metabolic dysfunction. And the problem is that a lot of those people who have metabolic dysfunction don't even know it. And one of the things, and one of the reasons is that we focused on weight far too much. But there are, it's kind of been a red herring. And there are plenty of people who are obese, who are overweight, who are actually metabolically healthy. So I don't want you to think that just because you're overweight that you have metabolic dysfunction. You very well might have. However, what we're looking at is where is that weight distributed? Just like I said before, if you have an apple shape, you're going to carry that weight around the middle. That's much less healthy than if you carry your weight around your hips. And one thing that I'm going to introduce you to is the fact that you can be metabolically sick. You can have metabolic syndrome and you can be a normal weight, because there's also an area where we store fat that you can't see. So when you have that, we call it, you know, big butt weight. It's actually protective because it's showing that your body is storing excess energy in the subcutaneous areas of your body, and that can actually be protective. That's not unhealthy necessarily. Or you can store fat in your viscera, which is it's underneath of the muscles in the abdominal cavity, and it's around your internal organs. And that might, you know, you might be wearing a bigger belt because of that. And that's where that large waist comes into play. But something that, you know, we're just now learning about, and something that I want you to hear for sure, is that a lot of us are storing fat in our liver, and it's not anything that you can see. Okay. So that's why we care about this. And so, you know, the title of this is What Did We Get Wrong? The first thing that we got wrong is that we just equate being obese to being ill, and that isn't necessarily true. It really depends on where you're carrying that weight. You know, sub-Q fat or big butt fat is not necessarily, you know, metabolically bad for us. Big belly fat is not metabolically good for us, and big liver fat is what's killing us. Okay, so that's the first thing that I want you to hear, and if you need to write it down or if you have questions about that, please ask. The other thing that we've gotten wrong, and this has sort of been a 50-year lie, is that we've been blaming fat for making us fat, when all along it's been sugar that is making us fat and sick. About 50 years ago, there was some, you know, medical studies that were being done that showed that sugar was a culprit in messing with our metabolism. Not only was it making us fat, but it was also making us sick. And we just started getting that literature out. Well, the sugar industry is very powerful, very influential, has a lot of money, and they had a lot of money to lose if we, you know, if society at large knew how bad sugar was for us. And so they enlisted the help of some very influential people. One of those was a researcher from Harvard, and the other one was the head of the American Dietetic Association. And they kind of went on this smear campaign for fat, and they took the heat off of sugar, and they put out these articles in read and well-respected medical journals that basically pointed the finger at fat and not at sugar as being the reason that we were unhealthy, the reason that we were obese, the reason that we had high cholesterol levels, the reason that we had heart disease, the reason we were having strokes. And that actually isn't true. But once that information is out there in the medical literature, it's really difficult to retract it. It's really difficult for for us to recover from that. And we're just now starting, I would say, in the last 5 to 10 years of really debunking that myth and letting people know what happened and that it's been sugar all along that has been the culprit. So hear that. If you're writing notes, just know that where your fat's distributed is important, and that not just obesity isn't necessarily what's causing our metabolic dysfunction, but where we're obese. And I want you to hear that it's sugar. Sugar is a toxin in the liver, just like alcohol is. And so, I want you to be sure that you're hearing that. So where else did we get it wrong? We got it wrong because we were at the organ level. We're blaming our pancreas for not producing enough insulin to help keep our blood sugars low, and or blood sugars in a normal range. And actually, what you're going to find out is that our pancreas is doing a good job of putting insulin out there. As a matter of fact, we're asking a lot of our pancreas, and that our pancreas is putting out so much insulin that it's overwhelming our metabolic system, and that's what's causing the problem. So our pancreas is working just fine, but just know that in the body, the pancreas and the liver are very much related. They're almost considered like a single system, and that the fact that our pancreas is having to crank out all of this insulin because of the diet that we eat and how often we eat and how much sugar that we eat, that it's leading to not only pancreas dysfunction, but cellular and metabolic dysfunction, and also liver dysfunction. And I'll explain that a little bit more as we go along. And then we've also blamed our liver. We said, that our liver is the reason that we have this high cholesterol. And while our liver is responsible for a lot of our cholesterol, that you're going to hear from me that triglycerides is what we really need to be paying attention to, and that we really need to know what kind of cholesterol, not just HDL and LDL. We need to know what kind, like subtypes of those cholesterol delineations that we're dealing with, to know whether we're dealing with something that is affecting our health in a negative way or not. And we really need to be paying attention to those triglyceride levels, because that's showing us how our liver is metabolizing sugar, not fat, but triglycerides as a result of that. And we got it wrong. We're getting closer. It's like, that game that you play as kids, warmer, warmer, warmer. Well, we're getting warmer when we said that it's a dysfunction of the cells. And that's absolutely true in the fact that explains some of it. And what I want to explain to you is that on the cell, we actually have these little receptors. We have these little docking stations for hormones. And hormone is just a fancy way of saying that it's a messenger that docks to this little docking station on the cell and releases information into the cell, or it sends a message to the cell. So for example, insulin is a hormone. And so it docks to that little docking station, and the message that it gives to the cell is that I want you to open up the doors and let glucose in. And glucose is that fuel that we're later going to turn into energy as part of metabolism. So imagine, now I don't have any kids, so when I thought of this as an example, I thought it was kind of funny. But when you've probably heard of some insulin resistance, and it has to do with, at the surface of the cell, you have this docking station. And so imagine that your kid, you're on the phone, you're talking on the phone, and your kid is constantly pulling on your shirt saying, "Mom, mom, 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 mommy, mom." And after a while, you tune that out, right? You're not listening to his message any longer. And the same thing can happen to that docking station on your cell. So that when you constantly have insulin showing up and sending this message, hey, let some glucose in, hey, let some glucose in, that before long, that receptor becomes insensitive to insulin anymore. And so it is not responding appropriately. So it requires more insulin to be released and more messages to be released. Again, remember I said that we're wearing out our pancreas, not because it's not producing insulin, but because it's having to produce so much insulin in order to get the same effect. Another hormone that you may or may not have heard of in the literature is also called leptin. And whenever your insulin levels rise, your leptin levels rise as well. And so leptin is a hormone, and it has its own little docking station on the surface of the cell. So when leptin comes to the surface of the cell, its message is to the body that you are full. You have enough energy and you don't need to eat anymore. But we get resistant to that message. And so that's why we have people who say, I don't know what's wrong with me. I see that I'm overweight. I see in my labs that my metabolism is not the best, but I'm just craving food and I'm eating so much. And it is because not only are your cells resistant to insulin, but they're also resistant to leptin. So your body's not getting that message that you're full, that you don't need any more energy, that your cells are chock full of energy and they don't need it anymore. Okay, so, all right. The other thing, and where we're getting a little bit closer, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my notes because I just want to stay on time. I want to stay on task. The other thing is that we're finally getting a little closer because it is at the receptor, it is at the surface of the cell, but where we're finding all of the damage that occurs to the body is actually inside of the cell in the subcellular level. So those little organelles that live in the cell. Think back to sixth grade science classes. And the main little organelle that we're talking about is the mitochondria. And the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And it is what takes that, it's instrumental in metabolism, and it's what takes that glucose that enters the cell and it metabolizes it, and it pushes out this energy so that the cell can use that energy to do what the cell does. And it really depends on what the cell is. So if it's a pancreas cell, then it's going to be to produce more insulin and to produce pancreatic enzymes. If it's a kidney cell, then it's going to be to concentrate urine and to rid the body of waste products. If it's the liver cell, it's going to be to metabolize energy, to have these enzyme reactions, to produce hormones, to produce, the list of what the liver does goes on and on and on. But what we're finding is that not only is the mitochondria responsible for taking glucose and making it into energy, but it's also affected by those waste products. And don't forget that that's part of metabolism, is those waste products and our body being able to rid our body of those waste products. So when we have a condition and we're just bombarding the cell with all of this glucose and producing all of this energy, there's all of this waste product. And that waste product is called oxygen-free radicals. And I'm sure if you've been on the internet and you've Googled anything, that you have probably heard of these. And that's why antioxidants are so important, because these are toxins to the cell, and specifically toxins to our mitochondria. So when they build up, they affect the mitochondria. So what eventually happens is that we're continually bombarding the cell with all of this glucose, but we're not able to convert it into energy. And so not only does our mitochondria not function well, but our cell doesn't function well, and we start to be fatigued. Even though we have all of this energy, we're taking in all of these calories, we're converting it to glucose, we're trying to convert it to energy, and we're dealing with all of this excess trash in our cells and in our mitochondria that's leading to cellular dysfunction. And again, it really depends on where those cells are as to what symptom you're going to see, as to what effect you're going to see in the body. In the liver, you're going to see that the liver starts so this excess glucose that made it into the cell but didn't get converted in the mitochondria to energy is now stored as fat. And if we store it in our subcutaneous cells, no big deal. If we store it in those areas around our organs, a bigger deal. And if we store it in our liver, a really big deal. Because not only does our liver, is it instrumental in metabolizing and creating energy in the cells, but it's also instrumental in detoxing our bodies. So now we have all of these toxins just recirculating in the body over and over, and that's why you feel like crap. That's why you feel bad. So, and it is leading to fat being stored in our liver. And again, right now on the liver transplant list, 80% of the people that are on that list are because of fat stored in the liver, because we've killed our mitochondria, we've caused our cells to be dysfunctional, and it's all because we're bringing too much glucose, too much sugar into the cell. So I hope that makes sense. If not, this is the linchpin. This is what every bit of metabolic function, metabolic health, metabolic sickness sort of hinges on. You can't keep up with those waste products, so you have these oxygen-free radicals that are actually damaging the cell and causing the cell not to function. Okay, so I told you all of that to tell you what else are we getting wrong, and that is the way that we actually look at how our body is functioning, that we examine the function of our organs and this whole system as a system. And that is we look for in the labs. So just know that anytime that you get a lab done, it is a simple snapshot of what's in the blood at that particular time. What it doesn't tell us is what's going on at the cell. Like, is that docking station just ignoring that hormone, or is that cell so chock full of energy that it can't convert into, or fuel that it can't convert into energy, and you have damaged or dying mitochondria? It doesn't tell you any of that. It doesn't tell you how your cell is able to use what's in your blood, or how your body's able to get what's in your blood out of your blood. It just tells you what's in your blood. So let's talk about some specific labs. We're going to talk about some traditional labs, and I'm going to shed a light on why functional labs are a little bit different, and what's some information that we look for specifically in functional medicine that your traditional practitioner really just hasn't been educated on how to look for that, and what other different labs to order. So this is the exciting part, because I like being I like being presented with a problem. I have a friend who says, look, I'm sick, I need help, I don't even know what's wrong, here's my labs. And I can tell a little bit from traditional labs, but I'm just so excited to be able to take it one step further. Let's get our big magnifying glass out, and let's look deeper. Let's not look at this symptom level. Let's look further back and further back and further back at what the root cause of all of this whole cascade, and why we're seeing the symptoms in all these different organs that we're seeing symptoms in. And symptoms are literally our body just yelling out and saying, I'm sick, I need help, we need to change something. Okay, so let's start with some traditional labs. Let's start with the fasting blood glucose. And remember, it used to be 110, and now we're saying that it's 100. And why this doesn't go far enough, and where functional labs can kind of help us out, is the fact that it only shows you what your blood glucose level is. It only shows you how much sugar is in your blood. Our bodies are really good at keeping that blood sugar at a certain level. But what it doesn't show us is how hard your pancreas and your liver are having to work in order to keep that blood sugar normal, in order to keep that blood glucose within that narrow range. What we need to be looking at is our insulin level. What we found out, there's an article, there's a study that I read recently that said in a 14-year period, and this was about 10 years ago, in a 14-year period, what they noticed is that in healthy volunteers, now these were people that were healthy weight, didn't have any medical conditions, were metabolically healthy as far as we knew, that the amount that their blood sugar was within this normal range, their blood glucose was within this range, and it stayed within this range. But what they found is that it took 2 to 4 times as much insulin to keep that blood sugar in a normal range as what it did before. And so that's where you come up with insulin resistance. That's where you see that your pancreas is overworked. That's where you see that you're just storing fat in your liver and you're causing your liver to be dysfunctional. The other thing that you can pick up on a functional lab that has to do with blood glucose is that you can see where your leptin levels are. So if someone is overweight or even obese and they're just like, I'm so hungry, then we know that that leptin level is likely to be elevated and that you're likely to be experiencing leptin resistance in the cell as well. Also, if you notice, like if you're getting functional labs and you're not quite to the diagnosis of metabolic syndrome yet, but you've got some things going on and you're trying to gauge sort of when do we intervene? How do we intervene? If you're noticing that your insulin, that it's requiring more and more insulin to take care of that blood glucose, that's where you want to intervene. That's where the preventative part of medicine 3.0 that we talked about before, that's what's so exciting, is that we can sort of intervene at the earliest level because we can kind of predict where this is going to end up just from these subtle little changes in functional labs that we can look at. Okay, I hope that this is making sense. If not, ask your questions. Like I said, I'm happy to answer those. The other one is going to be a lipid panel, and it's going to be a cholesterol. So, a total cholesterol level is completely useless. It doesn't tell you anything about anything because there is LDL, which is bad cholesterol, and there is HDL, which is good cholesterol, and total cholesterol just lumps it all in there together, and we have no idea what that means. So a total cholesterol value is just completely useless. However, why your doctor might be talking to you about this is because we have a medication for it, right? Why your traditional doctor might be interested in this is because they have something that they can do about that. They can put you on a statin and they can help to lower your cholesterol. But what we find out is that treating these symptoms isn't doing anything about what caused the symptoms. It's doing absolutely nothing back here at what started and led to this whole thing that we're now seeing in this lab value. Another part of the lipid panel is that you break it down into LDLs. And just know that even that isn't enough, that a functional lab is going to break it down into what type of LDL, because there's 2 types. One is completely neutral. It doesn't affect your risk of cardiovascular disease and stroke and diabetes. It doesn't increase your risk of hardening of the arteries or high blood pressure. It doesn't do any of that. It's completely neutral. And that's about 80% of your LDL in most people. And then there's this other type of LDL that absolutely really negatively affects your risk for cardiovascular disease. But without delineating those 2 out and measuring it and being very precise in the person that you're dealing with the labs on, you don't know. You just know that you're LDL, and it could be that it's mostly this totally benign LDL, and that it's not something that you need to treat. Or it could be telling you that it's mostly, or that it's too high of this LDL that is going to cause you problems and increase your risk for all kinds of chronic illnesses. And then HDL, which is the good kind of cholesterol. It's actually protective, and there are types of HDL that are super protective for the body. So you could have a good level of HDL, but you have this super protective type of HDL, and your cholesterol level is made up of a majority of this, which is ultra protective for your body. And you might get a different take from your traditional medicine doctor if they're just looking at a total cholesterol, or even if they're just looking at your HDL without breaking it out into exactly what's going on in you and your specific body, showing up on your specific labs. And then the last one is triglycerides. And so one thing about triglycerides, one thing about your lipid panel in general, is that if you are not feeling well, then your lipid panel is invalid. You can have altered values just because you are not feeling well. So if your white count is elevated, it's going to change the results on your lipid panel, whether you're fasting or not. It doesn't have anything to do with that. Or if your white count is low and you're experiencing a virus, don't get your labs done. And if you have labs that have been really crazy, and when you think about it, you're like, gosh, I was feeling terrible when I got that taken, let your doctor know, or seek out that you would get those repeated. Just so that you know, triglycerides, we always think that triglycerides are a measure of our liver function, and it is, but we've been taught, I guess, or we've come to understand that triglycerides tell us about maybe our diet as well, when triglycerides are a measurement of how well your liver is metabolizing sugar. Here we are again with sugar. I want you to make sure that you're hearing me loud and clear, that if you have high triglycerides, you have a metabolic problem, that your liver is being overwhelmed, and that you're putting too much sugar into your body. And if you have chronic stress, not acute stress, but chronic stress, your triglyceride levels are going to be even higher, and they're going to cause more damage in your liver. And when we talk about stress, yes, we're talking about emotional stress, not getting enough sleep, being physically exhausted, but we're also we're talking about the stress on the cells. And when one thing goes a little wonky with your hormones, it tends to affect in a cascade, because remember, we're one big organism and everything is interdependent and related to everything else in the body. It's storming here, so you might hear my dogs. So much so, and for example, that if you are hypothyroid and your thyroid hormone is still low, like it's not corrected yet, that you will see that your triglycerides are super elevated. And when you treat that thyroid and you get your thyroid hormone at a normal level, then those triglycerides are going to come down. It's just a function of the effect that thyroid hormone has on the liver and on your metabolism. So like I said, everything's all related. You can't look at one lab, your total cholesterol, and say you have high cholesterol, I'm going to put you on this statin, because it doesn't tell the whole story, and it doesn't tell how things are interrelated in the body. Okay, and then where we get it wrong is, and I've alluded to this a couple of times, is in the treatment. Our treatment is down here at the symptom level, and it's doing nothing about, what happened at the cell, what happened at the mitochondria, what happened at the organ level, what occurred at the beginning here, what we're doing to our body that's leading to all of these symptoms to shake out at the bottom. And so, just like my mom, she was on treatment for high blood pressure. She was treatment for high cholesterol. She was on treatment for high blood glucose, and it didn't change the outcome for her at all. And so I want you to hear that. Not that there's anything wrong, and I want you to keep going to traditional, your traditional medicine practitioners, but I just want you to think about that if this is something that you're having to deal with and you're not really feeling like you're equipped, you don't have the information that you need in order to do the right things, or you're not being told what to do, that there might be a role for functional medicine for you, and that, you know, it's really the marriage between the two of those things that help people the most. And so I want you to hear that as well. Okay, so now I never want to tell you all the bad stuff without giving you something that you can do to help yourself, and 3 things that you can do today. So the first one is that you can cut out snacking, and that is just because we're bombarding our bodies with glucose over and over and over again. We're overwhelming our metabolism. We're stressing out our pancreas. We're causing our cells to become insulin resistant and probably leptin resistant as well, when they're constantly having to deal with blood glucose. Something that goes along with that is that you need to start to eat whole foods. And when I'm saying that, I really want to be very direct, and I want you to hear this, is that you need to stop eating sugar, you need to cut it out of your diet, and you need to cut out processed foods. Because on the shelves at the grocery store, 77% of what's on the shelves has hidden sugar, and it's not always written as sugar. There's 45 different names for sugar, and some of them sound really amazing, but they all affect your body in pretty much the same way, unless we're talking about high fructose corn syrup, and then you can put a skull and crossbones on that, because that is death to your liver, essentially. And you're not off the hook if you're going to a restaurant and you say, well, I'm getting a steak and a baked potato and I'm getting some broccoli, because almost all of the restaurants in the United States get their food from one place, from Cisco Systems, and that food is likely to be processed and just sort of prepared in the kitchen, so that you are still eating processed foods. And, I'm with you. I am busy just like everybody is, but, meal prep, when you know how important it is that you eat whole foods, that you stop eating added sugar, and that you stop eating processed foods, then it makes putting that effort into cooking at home and meal prepping and that sort of thing, it makes it worth it. You know what that time is being spent for, what the end result is, what your return on that investment is. And then the last thing is that we prioritize fiber, because fiber is protective. Not only is it very good for our gut and our liver are so intricately intertwined that it's not even funny, but that it's protective for our liver as well, and that we move every day, because we have this excess energy, or we have this extra fuel in our cells. And one of the ways that we can offload some of that excess fuel that's in the cell is by using it up, by exercising, by using up that glucose that's in our bloodstream, so that we can cause less of it to have to be deposited into the cells, so that it has less of a risk to damage our mitochondria, to really mess up our cells, and so that our liver isn't so overworked that it's having to take care of all of the waste products, all of the byproducts of that metabolism. Okay, so thank you all so much for tuning in, and I hope that something that I've shared with you has really increased your knowledge of what's going on in your body, and just to let you know that if you need my help, that you can message me directly. I am taking new patients. We can hop on a call that just says, hey, listen, can I help you? I really want to hear what you're dealing with and let you know. If not me, then maybe I can refer you to someone else who can help you. So thank you so much. I hope that no one experienced a tornado while this was going on. And I just appreciate you all. And I hope to hear from you if you need my help. Thank you.